Welcome to Smart Franchising with Fransmart. I'm Dan Rowe, and I've masterminded the ascent of local favorites to global dominators. This isn't your usual get-to-know-you chat. We're diving deep. We're revealing the raw truths about franchise wealth building. With over 30 years in the trenches, I'm spilling it all. If you have an appetite for unfiltered tales and the hidden blueprints of franchise prosperity, buckle up. We're diving in. All right. Welcome back to Smart Franchising with Fransmart. And today, our guest is ironically the one lawyer I never, ever want to hear from, Ron Gardner. I never want to receive that fat FedEx from the Dady Gardner firm, and you shouldn't either. I'm both excited and nervous about this podcast because Dady Gardner relentlessly protects franchisees and goes after anyone or anything working against the best interest of the franchisees. Entire franchisee associations turn to Dady Gardner to protect their interests. And in fact, even today, the New York Law Journal published an article about Ron tightening the noose on franchise fraud to give you guys an example of what you guys are in for. So this episode is for those thinking about franchising, for those who shouldn't be franchising, the brands that aren't where they need to be before they start franchising, and the brokers selling brands that they shouldn't be selling. At Fransmart, we're approached daily by brands that want help franchising. Most aren't even profitable to begin with. And I want to do today's podcast to let you know that that's a terrible idea. But let's get going. Ron, you can't be all that bad because I heard you were a former DJ and
True.
You've got a story before you were attorney. So how about in your own words, your story and how you got here?
Well, thanks. First of all, thanks for having me. And I hope by the time we're done with this hour, we might even be friends by the time I'm done, Dan. Who knows? I am a second career guy. I had the good fortune of, I was a high school and college debater. The only thing I could do really well is stand up and talk to people. And so it seemed like law school was the next likely stop. Although I got derailed along the way from the age of about 22 until I was probably 26, 27, I was a major market disc jockey, and I did just about everything you can in radio, from sitting in a studio and doing the traditional stuff to flying around in an airplane and reporting on traffic to doing play-by-play high school basketball games. So that's kind of what I did. The one thing I will say about radio, or maybe I'll say two things. First of all, it sounds great, but they could teach a monkey how to do that. And with no offense to my disc guys that are still friends that are disc jockeys, it's not. It looks difficult. Technically, it's not. The only real skill you have to be able to have is to sit in a room and talk to yourself and make it sound like you're talking to somebody else. The other thing is, because everybody in the world thinks it looks glamorous and wants to do it, is they pay no money. So when I got married and we started having children, I needed to get a real job. And so off to law school I went. I became a lawyer 30 years ago last month, and my first job was with J. Michael Dady and Associates. I was the associate. I'm employee number one, and I've been with Dady since the day I started. And the only thing that we've ever done, period stop, is represent franchisees, dealers, and distributors, downstream trademark users, in their relations and disputes with the upstream trademark holders, franchisors, manufacturers, and suppliers. And I've had the great good fortune to be sitting in that seat for the last 30 years. So here I am.
Yeah. And so on that subject, like how of all the things did you get into representing franchisees, and like why this particular business? Like why franchisees of everything else? Like, did something cause that?
Well, yes, but not in mine. It really came from Michael, and then it sort of ended up fitting me. So Michael's father was a beer distributor, a Hamm's beer distributor. And when he was a very young lawyer back in the early 70s, Hamm and Pabst merged, and his dad, along with about 30 other dealers or distributors, got termination letters. And he had just started as a summer clerk. He was still in law school. And so he got the firm he was working for to represent these 30 guys, and they got a nice settlement. And so he was very interested immediately in franchising and distribution. As I was coming out of law school, like I said, 30 years ago, we've had the Great Recession and the pandemic. And, frankly, a lot of people are younger than me. What people don't remember about the early 90s is economics weren't great then either. This was when George Bush the first lost re-election as an incumbent because the economy was so bad to Bill Clinton, There weren't a lot of jobs out there. I was fortunate enough to get a job offer, so I took it. I really didn't. I had worked in a lot of franchising. Actually was a restaurant manager trainee at Taco Bell. I worked at a Taco Bell for 5 years, so I understood franchising, but only from the consumer side. And then when I got into it, I had lots of opportunities to go do other things as I grew as a lawyer. But what I found, and I'm so blessed this way. I grew up very poor. I'm the first person on either side of my family to ever go to college, not professional school, college. My dad was a welder. My mom was a secretary. My parents divorced when I was 8 years old. It was a very blue collar background. And so what I found in representing franchisees very quickly is that I really felt this kinship to people who were struggling to make life better for themselves and their family. But when they were calling me, something had gone wrong, and they were finding themselves in the same place that my parents were. They had no power. They had no authority. The contract said the franchisor could do whatever it was they were doing usually. And if I couldn't figure out a way to help them make things better, they were going to end up at the next place where failed franchisees end up: bankruptcy court, divorce court, sometimes the hospital or the morgue. It resonated with me in a way that really fulfilled my professional aspirations to both do something meaningful and at the same time practice complex, high dollar, high risk litigation. Because, when you make your living suing McDonald's or suing General Motors, they show up with the A-team on the other side. And so you had to be good, you had to be smart. So I was being fulfilled both intellectually and emotionally. And so I never had any cause to leave. I love what I do.
Yeah. And you're sticking up for the underdog, right? You're sticking up for the small guy. I know some franchisees are ginormous, but you're seeing between your firm, there's other firms that you start hearing more and more about that are franchisee specific firms. It's because there's a lot of crap going on with franchisees, a lot of franchisees that need help. But talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, that's the ugly underside is not everybody should be a franchisee. Not everybody should be a franchisor. And one of the things I've always thought is strange about franchising, frankly, is all the risk is essentially bared, or the vast majority of the risk is bared by one party. If you think about the rest of our economy, if you think about people who are shareholders, investors, the laws are set up to protect the people with the money. You think about minority shareholder laws. You think about the ability to sue people who make fraudulent representations about stock investment. The laws are set up to protect the money. Franchising, the laws are set up and the contracts are written to protect the brand holder. And the person that's making the monetary investment is the unprotected party. And so the negative consequences that flow from bad deals, and I don't mean to suggest bad deals are always the franchisor's fault at all. Bad deals are sometimes nobody's fault. You ended up in a bad location and things failed. But when that happens, one side here is the side that's bearing 99% of the financial hit, which can be tens of thousands to millions of dollars, depending on the situation. And so it is a place where, because there is so much risk and because there's so much downside to the failures, regardless of, I'm not putting fault if your businesses fail, there is a grow as franchising expands. It's not a surprise to me that the need for people to do what I do is also increasing.
Yeah, it's a sinister business because you've got a franchisee prepays to come into a system, right? He pays a fee up front. Then he signs the lease. He or she signs the lease, signs the loan, has personal guarantees, has liquidated damages, has all this stuff in their agreement. They're the ones proving the brand in brand new markets. And every time that they do that, they pay more royalties, which makes the company worth more. They prove the brand in new geographies, which makes the company worth more. So the company gets all this lift and franchisees don't, right? And then, they basically get what they
can. If the system takes off and it's real profitable, I have clients, I have clients that have become multimillionaires and are living far beyond the means that I could ever live because it worked. I'm not one of the people who run around and say franchising is horrible and nobody should do it. I do say that there's sometimes a little too much cheerleading on that side without the other side being talked about, which is, look, there is, just like any other investment, there is risk, reward, and we don't talk about the risks very much. We talk all about reward.
Yeah, I know where I was going with that was I want the listeners to understand, maybe from you, it is an unfair, unbalanced relationship. It's great when it works out. When it doesn't work out, there's like severe carnage, right? So like the franchisor, and I had someone today call me. They wanted to franchise a business. I get on the call. I'm like, tell me about your numbers. They're not even profitable, even without a franchisee paying royalties. But they want you to pay them that $40,000. They're going to spend that $40,000 in a second. It'll be gone within no time. That franchisee goes out of, if they fail, they're wiped out. I mean, not only are they wiped out because they, had $300,000, $500,000 at risk that they've got to pay back. They might destroy a relationship, could destroy, it's like dropping a pebble in the water, makes a lot of rings. But what are some of the bad things? People don't understand how bad it is being greedy like that.
Yeah, there's, all the things that happen when people are financially devastated, people that, I talk to people probably at least one a week. I talk to many new clients a week, but one a week, somebody has told me, they've completely liquidated their retirement account. They're into their second mortgage. Or they've sold their house to continue to pay because the business is losing. And one of the things that compounds this that we don't talk about is that when you get to that point, and you've got to face the decision of shut down to stop the bleeding, or what do you do? The double whammy here, or maybe even triple whammy, is the prospect of future lost royalties in these franchise agreements. And say, if you close early, you got to pay us either sometimes liquidated damages. Typically, it's not that. It's, we're going to average what you paid us over the last 12 months, and you're going to pay us that for the next at least 3 years worth. And I read one 2 days ago where it was, figure out, we're going to look at the last 4 years. We're going to take your best 12 months and what you paid us, and then we're going to multiply that by every month for the remainder of the franchise agreement. So if you're in a 10-year deal and this happens in year 3, you've got 7 years of your very best year, at least under the contract, if that becomes enforceable, to pay to get out. So at that point, what do you do? And then, like I say, it's a triple whammy. If you do close, and particularly if you have a lease, you can't do it. You can't run this business. The non-compete then hits you, right? So now you got to pay for 7 years of this, and you've got a useless asset on your hand, and you got a landlord who's going, it's not my fault. Where's my money? So it piles on. I think the pebble analogy is great because the ripples do just keep going.
Yeah. But that's why I think somebody needs a firm like yours, right? On the front end, you negotiate deals that hopefully mitigate a lot of these contingent liabilities, because they're liabilities, contingent or not, they're liabilities. But yeah, I just think, you take a short-term franchise fee. We're going to get into brokers in a second, but regardless, the franchisor at the end of the day is still taking that deal. And if the franchisor takes a deal and it wipes someone out, it's devastating. And think about what that does then to the family and the down. It's a lot. So, we talk about it a lot internally. It's like, just say no. Like we had one of our other brands today where the husband and wife that own the brand couldn't agree on the prospect. I said, then it's a no. Like you have to be so overwhelmingly positive that it's the right person and the right but I don't know. Otherwise you get problems, because it's also not good for a franchise or for people to fail, right?
That's right.
It just doesn't cost them anything.
Well, with the rare exception, and I this is not the rule. I've seen maybe 5 of these legitimately in the last 30 years. The guy who's out there whose intent is to do nothing but to churn their agreement. They want you to fail because they're just going to sell it to the next guy and they're churning it. They're using that initial franchise fee as their revenue model. Not very many of those, but that's the one place where I have seen franchisors not mind if you fail. Unfortunately, but not many of those. I don't thank goodness I don't see very many of those.
Hey, so let's talk about sort of this movement in about ethical, clean, whatever word you want to use, but like California 919. I actually think that that's good for franchisees. And I wonder, why isn't that federal? Why don't more states do that? Why is everybody, I mean, I think you even said everyone but the brokers love it. But it's like, I don't know, like there's a reason that there's a reason there's firms like yours. There's a reason that there's movements like 919.
Yeah. And I think it is because as franchising continues to grow, and as guys like you and me who've been in it for a long, long time, it seems like it's been ubiquitous forever. It hasn't. It just continues to get bigger and bigger and bigger, and more people are in that business. And, you drive around any, even tertiary markets anymore, but it used to be major, then second, now tertiary markets. I'll go on vacation with my family. Go, that's a client, that's a client, that's a client, that's a client, that's a client. They're just every other business is a franchise anymore. As that continues to grow, the way people are getting in, the way they're learning about it, is growing. And it's not surprising to me that there's a network of people who are brokering. It makes sense for emerging franchisors who don't have the manpower to use a third party who maybe has those sorts of contacts. The loophole that 919 is closing out in California is the disclosure piece. I'm hopeful, and I'd actually kind of expect, if your listeners know about NASA, the North American Securities Administrators Association, that's the trade group that sort of brings all the state regulators together, and they usually take their cues. The states regulators will take their cues from NASA. I know NASA was somewhat instrumental in getting California to do what they did. I would expect that there's going to be more push that for other states, at least the ones that regulate franchising, to incorporate things like 919 into at least their regulations, if not their actual statutes. Why there's nothing federal is, frankly, the only thing federal is the federal, is the FTC rule. It only gets updated putatively once every 10 years, but the most recent rule review started in 2019, and here we are 5 years later, and we're still sitting on the rule that was issued in 2007. So that rule now is 18 years old. Would I expect the FTC to potentially add some more disclosure requirements around brokers in light of this? Yes. Do I expect it anytime soon? No. I don't. I'm actually big fans of the things that the FTC does do to regulate franchising, because at least somebody's doing something. But there's nothing more slow and frankly more of a pendulum than federal regulatory agencies. I mean, with the Trump administration coming in, I could see the FTC throwing their hands up and going, we're not doing anything. No more regulation is bad. Therefore, we're not issuing any new regulations. I mean, and that's just a function of which party's in power. So I'm more optimistic that we'll get some things done on the state level.
Well, and whether that gets passed or not, it doesn't stop bad franchisors from getting sued, right? If a franchisor does something that they shouldn't, I just want to get your side of that for a second. Like, why do franchisors get sued? Like, what are the causes? And just for someone who doesn't know, like an emerging brand, what are the likely scenarios where they're going to possibly get sued?
Yep. Okay. The first thing I got a two-part answer to this. The first thing is, I think you just need to think of a life cycle of a franchise, because there are stops along each one of those phases where conflict exists. The front end is where we see the fraud cases. People are out selling the opportunity. They're overselling it. They're saying things. They're making financial performance representations outside of item 19. They're estimating the stuff in items 5, 6, and 7 in terms of the costs. That's all, let's call it pre-birth of a franchise, all the front end stuff. The least of the three pieces I'm going to give you, the one that we see the least, but ironically sometimes get the most complaints about, is during the actual operation of the franchise. And these are going to be things like, I'm not getting the support they told me that I was going to get. There's no return on investment, or they're too expensive, or they didn't have a right to do this. They're encroaching on me. They're putting someone, too close, and it's sucking away my business. So the things that are going to happen that are essentially going to decrease the profitability of the franchisee at the unit level. So whether you're somehow the franchisor is driving up costs or they're driving down revenue, either one of those I'll get a call. And then the last are the things that happen at the end. The franchisor is not approving my transfer. The franchisor won't let me bring my kid into the business. I got a termination notice. I've been defaulted. So that's sort of the really broad stroke umbrella. If I were to categorize those in terms of the percentage of the types of cases that we see, I would say probably 50% are in the first category, the fraud category, people overstating out of the blocks what they're doing. I would probably put 40 to 45% in the last category. Lots of action on transfers and terminations. Non-renewals would go in that bucket. And then I get probably, ironically, more complaints, daily calls about that middle bucket, about things that they're doing. But the reality is that there aren't a lot of legal claims there because, as I said somewhat at the outset, typically what the franchisor is doing is allowed by the agreement. And so unless they're going so egregiously far as to be driving the franchisee out of business, there's not much of a claim. So in a way, I've got to talk to people a little bit off the ledge there. It's like, well, how can we soften this up? Can we get a cap on the new technology fee? Can we form an association so you at least have a voice at the table when they're going to make these big changes? What can we do to sort of help make things better? But in terms of a franchisor being sued, I'm not going to say they're 100% insulated there in that middle trough, but more so there than on the front end or the back end.
Yeah. So let's take the first one, the fraud, misrepresentation, that kind of stuff. Somebody just alleges it happened and they've got some, on this email trail or on this phone call or whatever, they allege it happens. That and that franchisee is intent on having a trial or at least going to summary judgment. That franchisor is going to spend a minimum $100,000, even if they win, right? And so,
I would say it's going to be more than 100,000. If you're going through summary judgment, let me tell you the steps that you're going to get to before summary judgment. If you're the defendant, you're the franchisor. You're going to, first of all, your lawyer's going to tell you they don't have a claim here. They can't prove it. We're going to bring a motion to dismiss before we even answer the complaint, alleging they don't have a claim, which you're going to lose, by the way, 95% of the time, because the only thing that the plaintiff has to prove to win on a motion to dismiss is I pled this correctly. If you take what I said as true, which is what the standard is, we have a claim. So if the plaintiff's lawyer has done his job, you're going to lose as the defendant on a motion to dismiss. But it's a free shot because if you're one of that 5% that do win, you're out. So you take that shot. That's going to cost you $50,000. Then you got to answer the complaint. That's going to cost you another $20,000. Then you're going to engage in document discovery, which, by the way, today automatically requires that you go out and hire a third party to cull all your emails of the entire system to find everything that you have. That's going to cost you probably $50,000 to $100,000, depending on how wide the scope is and how many people talk to this franchisee and how many email domains do you have. Then you're going to do depositions, which are going to run you between the lawyer's time and the transcript and the travel expense, $20,000 per. Let's say probably for prep with the lawyer and everything. Yeah, $20,000 per. Let's say there are 5 of those. There's another 100. Then they have to write the summary judgment brief. That's probably another 30,000. I don't know what that adds up to, but it's 250 probably at least before you get to summary judgment. And look, the truth of the matter is in my view, today, if you're going to by the time you get to trial, unless you either have a deal with an in-house lawyer who's doing it for you, or you've got some flat fee with your lawyer who's doing amazing things. If you're paying the people in our business, in our franchise business, who are good at this, who are the good litigators, you're paying between $600 and $1,200 an hour. You're going to be in by the time you get to trial somewhere between $400,000 and $750,000 before trial. So,
but I wanted you to articulate that because I want people to think about that number in the context of a $50,000 franchise fee, right? You're trying to get a $50,000, even if you're lucky and you get a multi-unit deal for $100,000. If you do something stupid, you're going to lose 4 times that much money. And plus, I mean, you're lawyers, so you guys actually like lawyering. People that aren't lawyers, they don't sleep well when they're going through this stuff. It's a lot of anxiety you guys cause.
well, you might overestimate how much we love it. I mean, nobody has to spend more time with lawyers than lawyers. It's not that great.
Well, let's talk a little bit about win-win, right? Because you have, and we'll back up just a second, but because I want to talk about win-win. And you get called on to help people put together franchisee advisory councils and stuff like that. Usually, I think, is my bias, I think that those things are originally formed from frustrated franchisees. Am I right?
You are right. There's always negative energy.
Right. And so they try to band together and try to organize themselves basically just because they want to be heard. They want to have an effect and they want things to be more reasonable. But what are some things that first that actually cause people to want to form these associations? What are some things franchisors do that frustrate the hell out of franchisees? And what should franchisors do to be a little bit more win-win?
Thank you for this question, because we're finally getting to the stuff that the last 10 to 15 years of my career I have been completely dedicated to. I was solely a trial lawyer representing individuals and small groups of franchisees for about the first 15 to 17 years of my career. The last 15 or so have been more and more and more associational work, system work. Let's make things better for everybody instead of having this fight on behalf of one person or a group, frankly. 2 quick anecdotes to sort of illustrate to answer the question, what do franchisors do? My very first experience with a large group actually was one of my very first cases when I joined Michael 30 years ago. We represented the Independent Association of Taco Bell Franchisees. And what had happened in that case, this is back in the days when Pepsi owned Taco Bell before it's created Yum and spun that off. And the guy that was the president of the Taco Bell brand for Pepsi stood up at the convention and said, we're moving to a new pricing model. And for those of us that are old enough, you're going to remember this. We're selling everything for 59, 79, or 99 cents. And if you can't agree to that, your territory manager will be in touch with you and we will talk about how you can exit the system. I mean, that's the message from the stage to the convention. Within 3 days, 92% of the franchisees had signed up for this new organization to fight back on this idea that the franchisor was going to drive their pricing. And that was actually my first jury trial, because at one point the franchisor came after the individuals who were spearheading all this and started terminating them and not approving them for growth. And there was no win-win going on in that situation. The case that sort of changed my career trajectory from being a litigator to being an associational guy is this. This was probably 18 years ago. I was at some meeting and this small group, I think there were 3 guys, came up to me and said, we'd like to talk to you about representing our system. And I said, okay. And we were in I think we were in an Embassy Suites, because in my memory, we're this little teeny little alcove off my bedroom and the little love seat and stuff. And they're telling me about, all the horrors of the franchise, which is what I hear day in and day out. And they get to the end and I ask them the question that I ask every prospective franchisee when I hear that is, I said, okay, if I could do anything for you, what would you like me to do for you? And they said, well, we'd like you to have the president of the company removed. And I sort of smiled and I said, well, that's interesting. I said, I don't know that there's going to be any judge, jury, or arbitrator that has the authority to order that, but why? Why do you think that's what you need? And as I said this, the guy that had been talking reaches down and he picks up a plastic garbage bag and he opens the bag and he reaches in and he pulls out a shirt and it is covered in blood. And he said to me, this is the shirt I was wearing last week at our convention when the president physically assaulted me before the police came and took him to jail overnight. And I said, you do need to get rid of the president, but we're not going to be able to do this through regular legal means. And so in that particular case, it was a small system. We worked for about a year. The franchisees banded together. They formed a co-op. We bought the company and we fired the president. And what I found through that work was it was way more satisfying to me to try and help an entire system make things get better than it was to go out and try and protect one guy who maybe his rights are being violated. Maybe he really is the deadbeat of the system because every system has one. Doesn't mean they don't need good representation, but sometimes people deserve to get that default notice. And from that point forward, I started looking for opportunities to start representing groups. And within a couple of years, I ended up becoming the outside general counsel for lots and lots of the really big franchise associations out there. And I certainly don't mind saying, I think most people know I represent the KFC Association. I represent the Wendy's Association. I've done work for the Burger King Association, the Subway Association, and not all food, by the way. Meineke Car Care, General Nutrition Centers. I mean, lots of them. And I find so much more satisfaction in getting a franchisor to trust us that, look, I tell my associational clients that the measure of success for a franchisee association is to become the franchisor's most trusted business advisor. And when you think about your most trusted business advisors, they have some things in common. They are very publicly supportive of you. They want you to succeed. They tell people how great you are. Associations should be in a position to hopefully be saying that about their franchisor, and they should be proud to stand up and say, we sit alongside these guys because we're making the lives better for all of our members in conjunction with the franchisor. The flip side of that with your most trusted business advisor is this, though, which is when you're doing something that's really stupid, they're the first ones to pull you aside and say, what in the world are you doing? That's the dumbest thing I've ever seen. And they feel comfortable doing that because they know that they're doing that for the right reason, that you know they're doing it for the right reason. They want you to get better at what you're doing. They want you to not make mistakes. And associations should be free to do that too, to pull the franchisor aside and say, you're making a giant mistake here, and here's why. And how can we make this a better decision for you? And ultimately, you're still the decision maker. Your business advisor isn't. The franchisor is still the business decision maker. The association isn't. But you're using the association in a way that helps you make better decisions for everybody that's invested in the system, not just the franchisor side of the ledger. And so this is a long way to get to the last part of your question, Dan, but what can franchisors do better? They can listen. The number one, when you started this whole section by there's frustrated franchisees, that's absolutely right. What gets franchisors facing the fire is they've done something without engaging the franchisees along the way, without considering who's paying for this, without considering the return on investment or the profitability. And I would go out on a limb and say 80% of the cases that we bring on system issues, whether it's a rebranding or piece of equipment or a new marketing plan or whatever it is, 80% of those cases would never be brought if the franchisor, either before they announced it or even, frankly, after we're involved, said, why don't we just sit down and talk about this? Because those lawsuits are being driven by the frustration of franchisees not being heard as much as they are being driven by the financial ramifications of the decision itself.
Yeah. So you said something important. A lot of that's coming from franchisees feeling like they're not heard. They're feeling helpless. They're feeling taken advantage of. Nobody likes to feel that way. So you think about that's avoidable. So like you had said 80%, when you were saying that, I'm like, probably 80% of the reasons people get the franchisees get sideways is avoidable. Like, if they just would stop doing stupid things. I'm always in awe how franchisors do stuff that frustrate franchisees. I said earlier, franchisors have it made. The franchisees prepay them. They're proving the brand. They're doing, and they still have to follow their, if the brand adds something else on the menu, they've got to do it, right? They've got to kind of work with the franchise, and the franchisor is not always going to get it right. The franchisee still has to come along for the ride. And, but, and then a franchisor, even though they have all this upside, like to me, and it might be petty in the big scheme of things, but think about like a renewal fee, right? A renewal fee. Like it drives me crazy that any brand ever would charge. That person already paid you to come in. They've been paying you the last 10 or 20 years of royalty. They've worked through all your issues, and you're going to go charge them another $15,000 or $20,000 for renewal fee. And it's just like, it just makes me feel like these franchisors don't understand it. And the only role of the franchisor is to make the franchisee successful, right? Because the franchisors can't be successful if the franchisees aren't successful. And the most successful franchisees are the big ones. The most profitable franchisees are the big ones, right? The ones that pay you tons of royalties against one phone call, not 100 franchisees owning one each, but one guy owning 100. And yet so many franchisors won't do. I mean, sadly, I know too close to me franchisors that frustrate even successful franchisees are like, I'm not building anymore. I'm just tired of this crap. But why is that?
Yep, I have a lot of those clients too. It's I think you and I talked about this when we first touched base about potentially doing this. That I sit on airplanes and people, you're sitting next to somebody, and they, what do you do? And I start explaining to people what I do, and people always the number one question I get is, what franchise would you tell me I should invest in? What are the good ones? And I end up shaking my head and I'm saying, I'm sorry, I can't help you. I am the mortician of the franchise business. Rarely does someone call me and say, hey, Ron, I just want you to know I'm making a ton of money, but I'll call you if I ever need you, right? I mean, when people call me, things have gone badly or headed that way. And so it is important that I think that franchisors, particularly emerging ones, the established ones have sort of figured out their personality. They either get this or they don't. And if they don't, they've decided, and there are some out there who've just decided, look, we're going to do it the way we want. And we got enough money and enough capital and enough prestige that you should know better that you signed up for this. But emerging ones can build into their culture these things that avoid the bad calls that I get. Some of the tips I give people is get your most influential franchisees together and form at least a franchise advisory council that has some independence. One of the negatives to franchisee association councils, as opposed to independent associations, is they can really quickly take on the impetus of rubber stamps because the franchisor selects who's on there. If they don't like what you say, they set the agenda. If they don't like you, they can ask you not to come and appoint your replacement. Back to this most trusted business advisor thing. Don't just pick the yes men and women here. Pick the people who will give you criticism, constructive criticism. But again, do it in the privacy of the boardroom, not in the courtroom, not in the court of public opinion. People are trying to make things better. And if you can't do that, encourage them to form an independent association so that you have that resource as a franchisor. One of the things, and I think this is getting a little bit better, and I will say somewhat immodestly, in part because of the work that some of me and my other colleagues on the franchisee bar have done to make it clear that franchise associations aren't always there just to sue people. But it's amazing maybe how many franchisor lawyers, tell their franchise or clients, don't talk to the association. I mean, given what I've told you before, that's just gas on the fire. I mean, we're here because you're not talking to people. So now we've gotten together and you still won't talk to us. You know where that's going to lead? That's going to lead to me drafting a complaint, because the one way I know I can make you talk to me is through a subpoena. Why are we doing that? All I want to do is sit down and talk about what it is you're doing and figure out how it is you can take our input into your decision making.
Yeah, Ron, the truth is, if the franchisor doesn't they should create a safe environment for franchisees to form an association so that they can share best practices, communicate all this stuff. The truth is, if they don't, they're going to form one anyways.
That's right. And the thing is the one thing I wanted to say about that negative energy, because they will form it. I mean, one of the big battles I have when I get people who call me up is they're mad, or they're afraid, or they're both. And what they want me to do is to help them organize the mob so that they can march to the castle with their pitchforks and torches and slay the ogre. I've got it. One of my challenges, and it's interesting and it's fascinating and a lot of psychology involved, is move people from that negative energy that they come to me with to the positive win-win brand building. We're going to be their most trusted business advisor mindset. The biggest obstacle I have in terms of getting people from here to there is how welcoming the franchisor is to creating that sort of relationship. So when I get the "we're not talking to you" response, well, then we're going to organize the mob.
Yeah. But maybe to sum up this whole subject, a huge chunk of what goes wrong has to do with not communicating well.
That's right.
And that's avoidable.
Yes, it is avoidable. And franchisors can encourage people to put the tools in place, right? And then play their part, be the trusted partner, be the active listener, take what franchisees are saying to you seriously. And look, at the end of the day, you may make a decision that the franchisee disagrees with, but if franchisees feel like they were truly heard in the process and that you considered what they said and you have a good reason for not doing what they want you to do, or you're going to do it differently, and you can explain that to them as an adult in a professional manner, like, look, this is the choices we had and we've made this one because it's an irrational franchisee who won't listen to that and go, okay, yeah, I see that. It's a little more work for the franchisor because you got to listen to somebody else. And if you go a different way, you got to explain it to them. But the amount of money, time, headache that they avoid in doing that is so worth that little tiny bit of investment.
Yeah. What are just like 1 or 2, 3 things a franchisor can do to make it more win-win from everything that you've ever seen? Like, just do it this way. But like, what are a couple of things that franchisors can do for win-win?
On a macro basis, we've already talked about be welcoming, either form an FAC or be welcoming or supportive of an independent association. I would say some specifics under that include set up institutionalized regular communication channels, whether it's a once a year or once a quarter, whatever it is, meeting where you let the franchisee set the agenda and they can come in and tell you, we've got these issues that are bubbling out there. We need you to pay attention to them. So don't just form the group, actually create I'm going to use the word again, institutionalized mechanism, because the players are going to change. The franchisor is going to get sold. The franchisees are going to come and go. Just make it part of the culture that you've got that communication piece. I think that's a huge win. Don't make I know your contract says you can do it. Don't make decisions that are going to cost franchisees tens of thousands of dollars without involving them every step of the way. Do we need to do this? If so, what have we done to look at alternatives? Do we have are we selling, or is the vendor we want to go do this with us? I mean, we're going to be immediately suspect if you say, we need you to put in a POS system. And by the way, we've got an ownership interest in this new technology company that sells a POS system. Involve the franchisees because they're the ones that are paying for it and are going to have to use it. So be mindful. I like to tell people, you got to think like the franchisees in a way are the CFO sitting over in the corner suite. No matter what great idea you have, you got to go talk to the finance guy about whether or not it works. And one of the problems with franchising is you get these people who, and I don't mean this disparagingly, but either because sometimes they're great ideas, but they're sitting in their cubicle back at the home office and they have to justify their existence. So they're thinking and they're creating but they're doing it without the responsibility of, does this cost? How much does this cost? And does it work? Involve the people who will be able to give you that information, which is the people that are spending the money. The franchisee. That's the macro issue. On the micro issue, what I would say is let people who are failing go. Okay, I am completely in favor of enforceable non-competes, but I'm completely against future loss royalties, non-competes that would require people to pay you something. Just look, when people are failing, don't drive nails into their coffin. Find a way to say, look, we're sorry about this. This hasn't worked out. You agreed you're going to take the risk. We're not going to make it worse, because that to me is, there's way too much of that. That is the franchisor watching someone lose their life for the benefit of walking to the mailbox and picking up a few more $1,000. If franchises would just say, you know what, you are failing. You're gonna have to lick your wounds, and we're gonna lick ours. Don't be taking our knowledge and competing against us, but go on. Let's sign releases and you go on your way. That's a huge. That would solve a ton as well.
Yeah, because the guy's already failing. He's already falling down. You're hitting him as he's going down even more.
Correct.
So,
or even he's closed. I got guys who they just can't do it anymore. They've closed. And they've declared, they put their company into bankruptcy, and you're pursuing them on the personal guarantee for future loss royalties. I'm like, really?
Yeah.
Really? That's just a money grab. I mean, there is no other explanation.
Well, you're starting to ask one of the last things I wanted to ask you about. If you had your way, what are a couple of things that you would get a franchisor to negotiate out of their agreement, and why? Like, give the franchisee's perspective. I know why franchisors want it all one way, but like, why? I mean, you gave a couple of examples, but what are a couple of other examples of things that you would counsel a franchisee to change, and why? Like, what it really means to them?
Yeah, the two big ones for me are the one I already mentioned, which is the future loss royalties. You got to get rid of that. The other one that immediately comes to mind is cross defaults. So as people build and develop your brand, there's going to be missteps along the way. And these agreements that say if you default at one, it means you're in default of all. I mean, if I built 5 stores in my market for you and one of them is failing, let me close that store without you declaring me in default of all 5 of them. I mean, I need to be able to close things and redirect my investment to make sure the other 4 stay healthy and maybe find a better 5th location. But cross defaults tie people's hands in a way that don't allow them to shift resources the way that a normal business would be able to shift. It's just the reality. And maybe I had a health food inspection. I had a bad inspection at one of them. That shouldn't put in danger every other store that are getting 100s because there's a cross default here. So I would get rid of cross defaults. I've always thought there should be a symmetry between the scope of the non-compete. How big is it? I can't compete with another place within 5 miles or 20 miles of an existing location, and the territorial protection that I get. I mean, if I can't compete within 5 miles of somebody else, why should you be able? And by the way, that's with a different brand. So, let's make this up. I was, I don't know that this franchisor exists, but let's pretend it does. I was a Taco Fiesta franchisee, and I've stopped being a Taco Fiesta franchisee. There's a provision that says I can't compete within 5 miles of anybody else that's a Taco Fiesta, but I want to open Ron's Tacos. Somehow, Ron's Tacos can't get within 5 miles of another Taco Fiesta, but you can put another Taco Fiesta 2 miles away from me. Now, which one of those is more damaging to the existing franchisee? It's the same brand competition. So there should be some symmetry between how big my non-compete is, in my mind, and your ability to step on me territorially. And then the last thing I'd say, just because this is moving so fast, and I appreciate franchisors needing to update, and I appreciate that it's expensive, I really counsel people these days to build in a cap on the amount of technology fee that can be added in any given year, because there's nothing that's, I think, more dangerous right now than the blank check in franchise agreements that say you'll upgrade technology at whatever cost. I mean, they don't say this bluntly, at your own cost, which means it doesn't matter how much it costs, you're going to pay for it. I don't think any contract that gives the other side a blank check to charge you as much as they think they need to charge you for whatever they need to charge you for is a good idea. I want to give franchisors flexibility. I want them to be able to calculate what their budget is. Maybe it's you can charge us up to, pick a number. I don't care, $5,000 per year for new technology. And then the franchisor can multiply it. I've got 100 franchisees. Okay, that means I have $500,000 to spend on this. Well, don't go spend $1 million and then get a cap. That's what I'm saying. If I'm a franchisee, or if I'm saying to a franchisor, put that cap in there, because that's going to allow the people to make better economic decisions.
Tech fees are crazy. Like, they came out of nowhere the last decade or so, but they are crazy. And yeah, you're right. So the last thing I want to talk about is wealth and franchising. You and I both know a lot of really big franchisees, people that make a lot of money, people that I know, some of them that set it up to be generationally wealthy for their families and their downlines. I don't think franchisors do enough to make it easy for franchisees to keep building generational wealth, when in fact, like, those big, huge franchisees that are successful year after year, they're the most profitable franchisees that you're going to have. But any advice to a franchisor to set themselves up to attract and be more friendly to people that want to build generational wealth with their brand?
Yeah. The two places that come to mind as you ask me that are, be a little bit more flexible in your transfer provisions. I mean, the amount of restrictions that I see franchisors imposing. I mean, some of the things that you have to jump through in order to transfer, particularly even to family. I mean, do you need a right of first refusal when I'm giving my kid 5% to start the chain? I don't think so. And why should they have to even pay to call me, to have me call you and say, were you willing to waive your ROFR? Family transfer stuff in particular should be eased. I also am a strong believer, and I've been able to do this for a couple of my associations, that the financial requirements for family members to get in should be lower than the guy walking in off the street, particularly if the kid's been working in the business. If you got a kid who grew up frying chicken and working the front counter and then managing one of your stores, and then he's a area manager, and now he's here's a surprise. He doesn't have $1 million in net worth. He's been selling chicken. So don't require that. Find some mechanism that allows him to be the beneficiary of what I'm building here, despite the fact that you've got these. Otherwise, if someone's walking off the street, what you need to see from them. So, be calmer in your transfer requirements. The other thing that I would add there is be more open-minded to allowing franchisees to be diverse. Some of the non-competes that I see are just so broad as to make it really hard. I mean, if you're non-compete, if you're a burger joint and your non-compete says you can't be in a business that makes its primary money at lunch, well, that pretty much preempts the field unless I want to go from quick service to full service. It's just too. I mean, look, I get you want to protect your rights around burgers, but why can't I sell tacos or chicken, or find a way? And look, I'm focusing on food here because it's easy in terms of examples, but fitness. If look, there's a difference between a 24-hour, we have one person there for 8 hours a day walk-in fitness facility, and a full service gym. Allow people to be more diverse in what they're doing so they can create, because you might, in fact, many do. Franchisors are going to have a limit on how big I can grow with you. And at some point, my markets are going to be saturated, but I need to continue to do something with my wealth. So be mindful of that and allow that to happen, because the healthier people are, the more diverse they are, the more ability they're going to be able to live through any downturn in your particular business. Nothing worse, in my opinion, than having 5 big franchisees who've all been basically limited to your system, and then something happens that is a big hit on your system, because then everybody's going down. There's nobody there to sort of support the rest of the infrastructure. So think more like you're the franchisee once in a while. How about that? There's a what would you be doing if you were them?
That might be the theme of this, that and communication. So anything else you think we didn't cover?
I mean, this has been pretty good. I've really enjoyed this. I hope this is helpful, particularly to emerging franchisees. And if people And look, I've gotten to a place in my career. I've started working in the last 2 years. I'm not a member. I want to say that right now, but I've started working a lot more closely in a consulting role at times with the IFA. I mean, I get franchisors that call me and say, "Hey, Ron, what do you think about this?" Look, I'm going to make you say I have no conflict, because if a franchisee in your system wants to come after you, I'm going to take that business. But if people would like some ideas on how to get to some of these win-wins, get to improving communication, get to having a better FAC or independent association, I would be more than happy to give them some tips.
So how do people find you?
Well, they can either find me on our website, Dady Gardner. It's GARDNER.com. Dady, by the way, is D as in David, A, D as in David, Y. People get that wrong more than mine, I suppose. DadyGardner.com, or they can email me directly, rkgardner@dadygardner.com, or my phone number, 612-359-3501.
Nice. Thank you very much. And I hope nobody ever gets that fat FedEx envelope from you. Do you guys still send FedExes, or is everything done through emails nowadays?
No, actually, because we have to serve people and show that they actually got it, we do send FedExes. I mean, you'll probably get a courtesy copy by email. You'll get there the day before, but you're going to get both.
Well, I like candles every Sunday that I don't get that from you guys. So I don't want it. But thank you very much for your time. Been super generous. I learned a lot, and I appreciate you making time for this. So listeners, if you liked the episode, you know the drill. Like it and share it. You know how to get a hold of Ron, and we will see you guys next time. Thanks again. Hey, thanks for tuning in to Smart Franchising with Fransmart. I'm your host, Dan Rowe. If you enjoyed today's episode, this podcast is only going to get better. Please like, comment, and subscribe to hear more from the most successful franchisors and franchisees, and we'll see you next time.